Thanks everyone for joining us. We're still gaining a critical mass of participants, so if you could just hold on just a minute or two, we'll get going shortly.
Thanks, Wade.
Indeed.
Hi, everyone. This is Erin Curtis with Cali, PA. Welcome, happy Tuesday, and thank you for joining us for the interagency stakeholder briefing on water investments in the Governor Newsom's proposed 2022-23 budget. We're excited to provide more detail on the proposed investments in water resilience and drought response today. And joining us, we have, as you've already heard, from California Natural Resources Secretary Wade Crowfoot, Cali, PA Secretary Jared Blumenfeld, and California Department of Food and Ag Secretary Karen Ross are here and will be speaking. We also have representatives from the State Water Board and the Department of Finance available to provide answers to any questions you may have. In regards to the Q&A, we have until 2 p.m. For this briefing. So you'll hear from the secretaries first, and they'll be providing details on priority items in the budget related to water, as well as the release today of the water resilience portfolio update. And we'll leave as much time as possible for your questions. So for the questions, we'll be using the Q&A function in the Zoom. So please type in any questions that you have in that Q&A function and not the chat. If we aren't able to get to them all, you can always reach out to me or Andrea Ombres at Resources, Steve Lyle at CDFA, and we'll try to respond offline. All right, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, our California Natural Resources Secretary, Wade Crowfoot.
Hey, thanks so much, Erin, and thanks to you all for joining us today. As Erin mentioned, this will be a deeper dive into the governor's proposed budget, specifically focused on drought response and water resilience. I'm going to give a short overview, followed by Secretary Blumenfeld and then Secretary Ross. I wanted to recognize and give a shout out to a few of our key colleagues driving all things drought and water resilience who are also part of this discussion today and will be available to answer questions and share thoughts. That, of course, includes Carla Namath, who runs our Department of Water Resources, Eileen Sobek, Executive Officer at the State Water Board, and Chuck Bonham, who leads our Department of Fish and Wildlife, as well as David Shabazian from the Department of Conservation. So huge thanks to the day-to-day work of they and their teams on the topics we'll talk about today. The next hour is all about sharing some high-level information with you about the governor's budget that he outlined yesterday, and then having a chance to answer your questions. We're excited that this budget includes $750 million of new proposed funding for drought response and water resilience, and we'll go through that. It's important to note that all that we'll talk about today on the budget is really meant to align with the water resilience portfolio that we issued almost 2 years ago, back in July of 2020. I'm sorry, yeah, July of, boy, it seems like over 2 years ago, but almost 2 years ago, but I think it's about 18 months ago. That water resilience portfolio came out of an executive order that Governor Newsom issued, directing our agencies to come together and to develop a very clear, transparent, comprehensive, coordinated set of actions that we in the state would take responsibility for to build drought and flood resilience. We're excited today to release an update of that water resilience portfolio, what we call a progress report. Huge thanks to Nancy Vogel and others across our agencies that have provided and coordinated that update. In your chat, you have a link to that progress report. We're really excited. The portfolio, we think, really built to modernize the paradigm for water management, supporting local and regional agencies as they prepare for drought and flood, recognizing regional differences, ensuring all Californians have safe water, protecting fish and wildlife, partnering across watersheds, upgrading infrastructure to handle bigger swings in precipitation. We'll talk about that today, and including better information systems that help us track and manage water. As we know, water management, water infrastructure is very much a work in progress in California, and we are excited to share that update of all of those actions in the water resilience portfolio. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about $750 million of new proposed funding from Governor Newsom in this budget. And that comes in addition to what was announced last year. You'll recall in our last budget, the governor and the legislature appropriated $5.2 billion over 3 budget years to address drought and water resilience, which of course includes flooding resilience. That $5.2 billion is spread out over 3 years. So part of what the governor's proposed budget includes is $1 billion within that 5.2. That's really meant to be the second year tranche of funding in that announcement. And so $1 billion of the 5.2 is included in this budget, including $100 million for recycling and groundwater cleanup, $100 million to improve water conveyance, $190 million for wildlife corridors, fish passage, and stream flow enhancements. Also funding for the Salton Sea, as well as Sigma implementation, flood management projects, and broad habitat restoration. So really excited to continue on that, to follow through on the commitment for that $5.2 billion investment. The new funding, $750 million, is broken down according to these categories. $100 million to our Department of Water Resources to support local water conservation efforts. Of the $100 million, $75 million will be made available in grants and technical assistance for urban suppliers' implementation of new water use efficiency requirements and, of course, improved drought resilience. Example projects include water loss audits, leak detection, and repair. That other $25 million of the $100 million will support grants to address water efficiency needs of small and rural communities. So that's $100 million. A separate $75 million will be distributed by DWR with the aim of replacing ornamental turf, the kind of lawn that nobody walks on except to mow the grass. DWR plans to distribute the turf removal funding through a grant program and also perhaps through contracts with organizations like the California Conservation Corps that can directly convert turf in communities to save water and energy and provide shade and cooling. As we know, resilient plants, including climate appropriate trees, use less water. And according to our estimates, each square foot of turf replaced saves about 36 gallons of water per year on average. The governor's proposed budget, the $750 million, also includes funding for on-farm water conservation that Secretary Ross will talk a little bit more about. And funding to allow for our local water agencies to expand recharge of groundwater, as well as repurpose land where groundwater use is unsustainable. The governor proposes another $75 million to help the Department of Fish and Wildlife address fish and wildlife impacts of drought. The funding, for example, will help Fish and Wildlife improve its land and hatcheries, address wildlife human conflicts, and encourage private landowners to take action to protect fish and wildlife. And of course, we have Chuck Bonham on the line here to share more about that. Meteorologists anticipate a warm and dry January, unfortunately. And so the proposed budget anticipates continued drought assistance with $120 million for Department of Water Resources, our colleagues at DWR, to replenish the urban and small water system drought relief programs, and another $25 million to the Water Board to expand support for vulnerable regions for drinking water emergencies, providing quick help like bottled water and storage tanks. Finally, of the $750 million, about $250 million will be held in contingency that will, if needed, would be allocated as part of the spring budget process. Goes without saying, we hope that the next few months bring more rain and snow to follow up on what is a strong start, but we're still very much in drought. And to share a little bit more about that, I want to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Jared Blumenfeld from California Environmental Protection Agency.
Thanks, Wade. Really appreciate it. And a big thanks to Karen too, and the entire team, Carla and Nancy and Eileen and Chuck, the whole team. As we've been describing in other parts of the budget, and I think really exemplified in drought and water management. We've really come together. The water resilience portfolio is an example of that, and Wade talked about kind of where we are on that. But I just want to thank all the colleagues, and actually all of you, the 359 of you who are joining, just for your tireless advocacy. You guys have really thought through many of these issues over many, many decades, and constantly remind us of better ways, more efficient ways of doing things. So just by starting out, really just appreciate all that you do. Just kind of picking up where Wade left off. We're definitely in a better situation today than we were a month or two ago, and the December storms essentially erased most of the storage deficit caused by the very dry 2021. However, as all of you know, most of the reservoirs are held at low levels during the winter months for flood control. So the real test of storage recovery will come this spring when flood control restrictions are lifted and reservoirs can refill their snowmelt runoff. So despite record levels of rain and snow this winter in some areas, California's water system is therefore still under stress, and weather extremes will continue. As many of you know, we need 140% of average precipitation this rainy season to get back to normal reservoir storage. Climate change has brought us increasing and substantial uncertainty in weather patterns. We simply can't predict how much or whether precipitation will occur in the next months or manifest in our reservoirs. And many of our most vulnerable communities, as Wade described, still struggle to get access to clean, safe, affordable drinking water. We need Californians to use our water resources wisely, and urban water supplies reported a cumulative statewide savings at 6% since July, when the governor called on all Californians to voluntarily conserve at least 15%. I want to give a few updates on recent state actions. As next year's proposed budget makes clear, we need an all-of-government approach. That's already happening, but we're doubling down on that to solving our climate problems, and that includes drought. Last month, the State Board and the California Department of Technology released a solicitation for a project that would update our water rights data for California, and up to $20 million is available to digitize existing paper records and rebuild the state's water right data management system. Since water conservation is the easiest, most efficient, and most cost-effective way to extend supplies into the next year, the State Board last week adopted a common sense emergency regulation that prohibits wasteful uses of potable water like excessive irrigation that cause runoff from landscape, washing cars with hoses that don't have a shut-off nozzle, using potable water for street cleaning, and irrigating landscape within 48 hours of measurable rainfall. With December storms, the State Board has lifted all water right curtailment orders except in Mill and Deer Creeks, where the curtailment orders are self-adjusting and flow targets have been met, and in the Scott River, where stream flows had not responded as strongly to the December precipitation. However, with anticipated dry conditions for later in the month of January and decreased water supply forecasts, the State Board reimposed curtailments in some of the Delta sub-watersheds just yesterday. State Board staff will continue to adjust curtailment orders as conditions change. For example, in the Scott River, even though December storms did not raise stream flows, this last weekend, curtailments were suspended for several days due to a small system in the north. Conditions are evaluated daily in most watersheds and curtailments adjusted accordingly. December storms have forestalled the need for DWR and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation to request a temporary urgency change petition waiver of water quality permit conditions from certain water quality requirements in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta starting February 1st to preserve upstream reservoir storage. The state and federal projects will continue to closely monitor hydrologic conditions to determine if a waiver may be needed later in the spring. For the first time, the state and our federal partners released captively produced delta smelt into the San Joaquin River Delta last month in an experimental project that will help inform future supplementation of this vulnerable species in the wild. DWR has released a final version of a framework for better managing drinking water wells, as called for in the governor's April drought proclamation. The Groundwater Wells Principles and Strategies framework is intended to provide direction and deliver solutions to support groundwater dependent communities to ensure the potential impacts of drought are anticipated and proactively addressed. And the state continues to move forward on the storage front as well. Local water agencies are pursuing 7 new water storage projects eligible for $2.7 billion in state water bond funding, advanced their projects in 2021. All projects were deemed feasible by the California Water Commission after completing draft environmental documents and arranging non-state financing, among other requirements. If completed, those 7 projects together would expand storage capacity in the state by nearly 2.8 million acre-feet of water. Many non-environmentally focused state projects are also getting involved in innovative water-saving solutions as directed by the governor. For example, the Department of General Services last month asked for assistance in reducing water use at all state facilities. The director asked leaders to use Save Our Water messaging, report water use monthly to DGS, complete sustainability roadmaps that highlight conservation measures, and embrace water use best practices. I'll pass the last segment of our conversation to Secretary Karen Ross, who will reference funding in the proposed budget that will support agriculture programming and assist the agricultural community. Over to you, Karen.
Thanks, Jared, and thanks, Wade. And I give special thanks to the governor for the budget that he proposed yesterday. Our continued work on climate and equity. Drought is an outcome of our changing climate. And so I'm going to talk very briefly about an ag-specific program that is part of the proposed 22-23 budget. This is our on-farm water use efficiency, fondly called SWEEP, which stands for State Water Efficiency and Enhancement Program, because we're government and we have to have lots of acronyms for the programs that we have. This is a program that actually was initiated in 2014 and continues to be one of our most popular programs as agriculture continues to conserve water more and more every year. The governor is proposing $20 million for the SWEEP program. That's in addition to last year's allocation of $50 million. The department is currently in the request for application period. And I just had a report this morning that the program is already oversubscribed for that $50 million. So we applaud the governor for proposing this additional $20 million for the budget process. This will leverage the good work that's been happening. Since 2014, we've been able to invest $80 million in over 825 projects in all corners of the state. And with that, we are really focused on accomplishing several things. One is reducing water use, reducing energy use, which also reduces our greenhouse gas emissions. So we're really thinking about these types of programs and the co-benefits that they deliver. The water savings from the programs that we've funded to date equate to about 37.5 billion gallons of water. To make that in a more relatable term, at least for me, my staff has quantified that to be the equivalent of 70,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools, and that waters a lot of food crops in the state of California. The good news is that we'll be able to continue our good work in this space. We also will share with the Department of Water Resources proposed $10 million for technical assistance to irrigation districts and to farmers. That will actually go to funding irrigation mobile labs. These are really great ways of being able to do education in the field directly with groups of farmers or individual farmers. We'll also support land use satellite mapping and imagery of land use around the state. This is increasingly important as we think about the implementation of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and the interaction of where we will be using water or trying to determine the best places for ag land fallowing. We will also be able to fund direct irrigation, education, and technical assistance to farmers. And this allocation to the Department of Food and Agriculture will create $5 million of direct assistance to farmers. We've never been able to do that in the state before until the last year when we established a California Underserved Farmer Program for COVID relief to farmers. And now we are establishing this drought relief for farmers. And we'll be working with our stakeholder community to set up that criteria. I wanted to end by saying that the farm and ranch community has been on a march of water conservation since the 1980s. A year ago, the PPIC estimated that we are in agriculture applying 14% less water to our croplands, but at the same time, we're using it more precisely to improve our productivity by 38%. So that's a pretty remarkable trend line. These programs will help us continue to do that. It's a trend line that's happening nationally. California has the implementation of the most precise irrigation methods across the country. And with these kinds of programs, we'll continue to do that, to do our part to save water, to reduce energy use, and to continue fighting climate by reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and water use. With that, I would like to turn it back to Secretary Crowfoot and just say once again, what a remarkable team we have across all of California government. I think the water resilience portfolio that the Secretary talked about in his opening comments is a reflection of all of government approach that is especially important when we face issues like drought, and understanding that there will also be floods in our future, because that's how droughts usually end, is with a flood event. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Secretary Crowfoot. Look forward to answering the questions. Thanks.
Yeah, hey, thanks so much. We've got a good amount of time to answer questions that you all have, and you can provide a question or pose a question on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And if you type that in, we're going to ask our colleague Aaron to MC the question period. And again, want to bring in Carla and Chuck and Eileen and David into the conversation to the extent that it's appropriate in the question. So once again, please do ask any question you have, particularly about the budget, probably that was just introduced. We want to make sure that we're answering whatever questions we can. If there are questions we can't answer or we don't get to every question, we want to make sure that you're able to follow up with our staff to be maximally clear. I'll say before we start the Q&A, goes without saying, but what the governor outlined yesterday was the beginning of the budget process this year, and it's a proposal. The legislature have been remarkable champions on drought response and water resilience. And now this proposal, of course, is going to be discussed and deliberated and ultimately decided upon by the legislature here in the coming months. So really do appreciate in advance your engagement in that policy dialogue. Erin, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. And we will start with a question for Secretary Ross. You indicated the governor's budget has $5 million for drought relief for small farms. The need may be far greater than that. So would the drought contingency fund of $250 million be used for that purpose potentially?
I think the contingency fund is something that's being established because, as was mentioned by both Secretary Crowfoot and Secretary Blumenfeld, it's early in our water year to determine what all the needs will be. But obviously, we look forward to working with all of our stakeholders in those discussions, in addition to our very important partners in the legislature, to make determinations about what may be necessary. I think it was a wise and prudent move to set this money aside so that we have this flexibility as the year unfolds and we face yet unknown challenges and opportunities.
Thank you, Secretary Ross. Next question is in regards to the Salton Sea and whether or not the C2C project is getting any funding in this budget.
Thanks for the question. Restoring and stabilizing the Salton Sea is a big priority for Governor Newsom, who's actually traveled to the sea at least 2 times in the last few years, and for me as well in my role. Our team at Natural Resources Agency runs what we call the Salton Sea Management Program, and we need to stabilize the shrinking sea by restoring 30,000 acres of habitat and dust suppression here in coming years. Our partner or overseer in this is the State Water Board, and we are essentially held accountable by our sister agency to ensure that we get that done. That Salton Sea Management Program is a near-term focused strategy to stabilize the sea. There are a lot of different and interesting proposals around the longer-term future for the sea, including what are known as water import proposals. The C2C proposal, as I understand it, would bring water from the Sea of Cortez into the Salton Sea. There are about 14 to 15 proposals that are both water import and sort of big idea proposals. And in order to assess those proposals, we've impaneled an independent body of experts that's being organized by the University of California, Santa Cruz. And that panel of national experts is assessing each of those 14 proposals and going to provide us an independent assessment of the technical feasibility of those proposals and also the financial feasibility of those proposals. That analysis is going to figure into a long-term management plan for the Salton Sea that we are committed to getting done by the end of this year. So in short answer to the question, no decision has been made about the state funding a water import proposal, but those proposals are being assessed by this independent body, going to make recommendations to us, and then those recommendations are going to inform the long-term plan we have for the sea that will publish by the end of the year. So appreciate that question.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. I think the next question may be for you as well. It's related to storage projects. So can you say anything more about the 7 new local water storage projects? Under what program those are eligible for funding?
Well, I think this may be referring to 7 of the projects that are funded under Proposition 1, which was the state's water bond. If folks recall, over $2 billion of funding appropriated by the voters for the purposes of enhancing the state's water storage. The Water Commission in our agency identified or selected 8 projects for that funding. 7 projects are moving forward. 3 of those are surface storage projects and 4 of those are underground storage projects. Glad to report that those 7 projects are moving forward and just passed an important milestone of economic feasibility with our Water Commission. Big storage projects, be they big underground storage projects or surface storage projects, are complicated and take a long time. And I know that there are a lot of folks that want to see those projects get built as quickly as possible, as well as some folks that have real concerns about the impacts of those projects. I can tell you that we at our agency are driving forward on those projects and undergoing the environmental review and all the checks and balances towards getting those projects built. I think we all recognize that we can collectively do more to recharge groundwater basins and store water underground, particularly during these big flood events or atmospheric rivers in the winter. So part of our budget is focused on enabling those groundwater recharge projects to happen quickly at the local level. New funding and the tune of about $30 million, I think, is supporting the planning and design and implementation of those projects. So we recognizing that smart conjunctive use, that is connected surface underground storage, is really important moving forward. I might just ask Carla to come in on this from DWR's perspective and just talk about a little bit about groundwater and where we're at with Sigma, because a lot of progress being made by DWR in the implementation of Sigma.
Sure. Thank you, Secretary, and good afternoon, everyone. As many of you may know, the department has been on course for reviewing the plans received by critically overdrafted groundwater basins. These are predominantly, but not exclusively, in the Central Valley. And we expect to make the next tranche of decisions over the next couple of weeks here. There's just been a lot of external assessments on these plans. And I think, what we're all seeing is that it is really challenging in some of these areas to create a sustainable path for groundwater management absent significant groundwater recharge. I think what we're generally seeing is, which is a very kind of rational approach from these local government agencies to lean on those kinds of projects. But we really need to roll up our sleeves and do some hard work around accounting for floodwater for recharge and how that's going to fit across the board, particularly in these valley communities. The department does have funding from the previous budget cycle from Governor Newsom to look at basically headwaters down to floodplains across major tributaries in the Central Valley. That will be a key step in really mapping out the availability of water for recharge. So that's going to be really essential to moving some of these groundwater recharge programs forward. And it's going to be a key piece, but not the only piece by any stretch in terms of these groundwater basins coming into balance. So folks can expect final decisions by the department on these critically overdrafted basins within the next 2 weeks or so. Also, at the end of January, we will get in all the medium and high priority basins. You may recall they had a deadline of January 2022. That is 70 new groundwater management plans in the door at the department, which will start the clock on our 2-year review process. We also have significant grant dollars for implementation of groundwater sustainability plans and recharge projects that focus on dealing with water quality issues, but also focus on dealing with groundwater dependent ecosystems. And we're really looking forward to some of the partnerships that we have going with organizations like River Partners and others, to a lot of folks, even outside of the groundwater management agencies, have been just doing a tremendous amount of work to understand how these projects might work. And we look forward to bringing lots of parties together to move from the conceptual phase of managed aquifer recharge to real specific projects that we could get permitted and constructed.
Thank you, Carla. I think the next question I'm going to pose may be for you as well. There was a question about the additional $120 million going towards DGBR's urban and small communities drought relief programs. Can you tell us if both of those programs are oversubscribed, and if so, by how much?
They are oversubscribed, but here's where we are with small communities. With both of these programs, we anticipate moving all the funding that was appropriated last year by June, by the end of June this year. Right now, for small communities, we're about at about 92 million, so about half of those. The available dollars have already been awarded to about, I want to say about 28 projects in rural communities throughout the state. We do have a set aside for tribal nations, and we're working more closely with those tribes right now to get those dollars out the door as well. For the urban and multi-benefit, we did our first round of solicitations. We got an enormous amount of interest. Some of it, frankly, was not eligible. We did just announce $57 million for that pot of money, and we are having conversations with others who were not quite eligible for how to actually apply for the subsequent round of funding. So we do expect that the additional dollars there will be ample projects that are worthy projects for drought relief that will be able to use those dollars and use those dollars fairly quickly.
Great, thank you, Carla. Next question is for representatives from the Department of Finance. We have a number of questions about the $250 million contingency fund and how that will be handled, how things will be determined, what is eligible. Is there someone from finance who can help answer that?
Yeah, Sir Dragler with Department of Finance. So just to clarify, there isn't specifically a fund itself. We just wanted to set aside an additional $250 million at governor's budget, acknowledging there's still some uncertainties on what the drought conditions will look like, to be able to come back in the spring with additional details on what proposals we would want to prioritize with that $250 million. And so, we already had some good data to be able to determine, all right, out of the 500 million, here's where some of the priority programs land. By acknowledging the just kind of level of uncertainty, we would come back in the spring, whether in April or May revision, to actually detail what the additional $250 million would be used for.
Great, thank you. Next question is about money for recycled water projects, $100 million. The statewide need obviously greater than that. Is the administration open to a more significant investment in recycled water projects?
So this is a huge, and the question kind of has some of the answer in it, which is the needs exceed $10 billion statewide. Actually, I think the needs in just the LA basin are about 12 billion for recycled water. And obviously, cities have been on the leading edge of this. San Diego has been incredibly forward thinking with their pure water initiative. Every fluid ounce of water that we can recycle and come up with a new use obviously takes enormous pressure off the natural systems that we're describing and the variability contained within that. Wade was clear on this, but just to re-emphasize, last year we put forward a 3-year budget of 5.2 billion. So this year's 750 million is on top of that. When you look at last year's budget, which actually includes a lot of that 3-year, this is the second year of that 3-year money. There's a lot of money and focus on the state revolving fund. The state revolving fund is the main financial mechanism used by local government and water agencies to build recycled water facilities. And especially with interest rates going up because of inflationary pressure, it's going to be even more oversubscribed than it currently is. The infrastructure bill passed and signed by President Biden included for this year, I think, $610 million additional dollars for these kind of projects. And we are looking at ways of increasing our ability to fund them through other funding sources, including the SRF itself. So we are very bullish on recycled water. It helps create local demand and supply at the same time. It additionally creates a lot of jobs, local jobs, and it helps create reliability of water supplies into the future. So Eileen and team are actually developing the world's first, for just a year away from now, 2023, direct potable reuse regulations that will allow the current system, you recycle water, and that even that tertiary treated water that's gone through reverse osmosis has to go into purple pipes. This will allow for direct injection of that water that meets the standards described by the Water Board into drinking water pipes, not into secondary system. And so it will be a quantum leap in how we think about water, and many systems are already looking at how they develop recycled water systems. So yes, the amount of money we have in there, in this particular 750 million, is not indicative of the very large commitment that we have made as an administration and the governor's made to recycled water. I don't know if you'd add anything, Eileen.
She indicates not. Thank you, Secretary Blumenfeld. We have a question about the SWEEP program now. Sweep requested funds are well over 43 million. The allocated amount for the current rolling application period with the deadline of Tuesday, January 18th. Is the $20 million for sweep in the proposed budget going to be aimed at this current round that's about to close, or is that for a future round?
Thanks. I could comment that obviously the person who asked the question is tracking the number of applications on our website because we have a dashboard to show people how many applications are in. The bottom line question is the $20 million is proposed for the next fiscal year. So this round will close, we'll make the awards. There are several things that factor into how many of those applications are eligible, are they complete? And we always first prioritize meeting the needs of those applications from our historically underserved and socially disadvantaged farmers. So there's a number of factors to know how many of those will get funded and how much money is actually already obligated. But the $20 million is for the next fiscal year. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Secretary Ross. There was also a question asking if you could repeat the stats about water conservation historically improving.
Sure, those stats come from the PPIC, and that was based on water use in agriculture between 1980 and 2015, which indicated 14% less applied water with a 38% increase in crop productivity. Thanks.
Thank you. This is probably for you, Director Namath, a question about Delta conveyance. Is there any additional funding being considered for that project?
No.
That is short and sweet. Thank you very much. All right. We also have a question. Hold on one second. I apologize. I need to find it again, but we have a question related to cleanup in the San Joaquin Valley for, and this may be for Director Sobek, is the groundwater cleanup funding, is it possible to use that in the San Joaquin Valley for salt management?
Yeah, that's a great question. The 2021, 2022 state budget included $400 million over 3 years to the State Water Board to support local water recycling projects and cleanup of groundwater to augment water supplies, and $100 million over 3 years to help water suppliers address groundwater contamination. Actually, that last $100 million is limited to PFAS cleanup, a new category of contaminants that we are more and more concerned about, but also receiving more funding. So we will take a look at those funds as well as the other potential infrastructure and drinking water funds that we've received to see whether there is any eligibility for cleanup of groundwater due to salt contamination in the San Joaquin Valley. There's going to be a fair amount of competition for those funds, so we really can't guarantee it, but we do have the dischargers of whose discharges into groundwater in the San Joaquin have resulted in that contamination are responsible for at least part of the cleanup, if not all of it, but we're always looking for ways to get groundwater cleaned up faster and more efficiently to make sure that water supplies for human consumption as well as ag use are as safe as they can be as quickly as possible. So more to come on that.
Thank you, Eileen. Next question, perhaps for Director Namath again, related to a question about atmospheric rivers. The Secretary Crowfoot mentioned their role in increasing groundwater recharge during flood events. Is there any funding in the budget to continue DWR's investments in the atmospheric rivers forecast improvements?
We do have actually $10 million for forecast informed reservoir operations, which is a terrific effort, both state and local partnership effort happening on in Sonoma County, also down in Southern California on the Santa Ana River system, and then up in Truckee with some of our federal partners with some federal facilities up there. And then for DWR, we're very engaged with water colleagues in the Yuba River on the Oroville and Yuba system on what's called forecast informed reservoir operations, which takes a look at how we use forecasts for atmospheric rivers to adjust operations for major reservoirs in the state. So we know that's going to be a key piece of exactly how we, one, create safe conditions when we get these really big storm events moving through, but also how we capture it and use it for water supplies later on.
Thank you. Next question. If January through April happen to be good water months, is it a possibility that the $250 million could go towards climate resilient infrastructure investments? I think that's also related to the contingency fund can be used for storage projects potentially.
I mean, this is Wade Crowfoot. I would say that, as Sergio from the Department of Finance mentioned, it's really the 250 is set aside to address however this water season evolves, and we'll have to make a decision later in the season what it makes sense to fund, whether that's acute drought response or something focused on longer term resilience or some combination thereof. So I would say to be determined on the overall use of the $250 million.
The other thing, Wade, just to emphasize, and Aaron, and for the people on the call, this isn't money yet until the legislature approves it. So we're already talking about whether we can move money around that hasn't actually been appropriated. So your role, we've all talked about what we need to do. Your role is to help us get the parts that you care about the most through the legislature. And that 250 million, I think, as Sergio said, we don't know everything that we don't know. And so May revise will play a large role, but we wanted, the governor and this whole team wanted to show that we understood there were contingencies that we needed to plan for, unforeseen contingencies. So before we start spending this 250 million, we have to get it appropriated. Before we have to get it appropriated, we need to put some details around it. And that will only really happen once we understand the water year ahead of us. But mainly we see you all as partners. As you all know, this doesn't magically work its way through the legislature. Water issues are often very seen by the legislature as complicated. We want to partner with as many of you and them as possible to explain this. If there's additional events like this that Karen or Wade or Carla or Chuck or Eileen or any of us can participate in to help educate folks on the importance of this budget, please let us all know. Erin.
Thank you, Secretary. Before I go to the next question, I just want to address the fact that there have been some questions about funding for Delta levies that have been posted in the Q&A. I want to let you know the Water Resilience Portfolio Progress Report that was released today does describe some ongoing funding and efforts to improve Delta levies and provides updates on funding on many different aspects of water management. So I would encourage you to go and take a look at that report for some information on that.
And can we put that in the chat, Erin, so that people have a direct link to that because the updated report? And Nancy,
yeah, we'll work on that.
So good. Great.
Will do. Thank you. Next question relates to water rate assistance. Are there resources in the budget that support developing a state program for water rate assistance for low-income water users? Obviously, utilities are making their own investments in climate adaptation activities, and water rates will rise as a result potentially. But with those Prop 218 restrictions, there are local utilities who have little opportunity to address the issue. Is there someone who can help answer that question?
So Eileen and I can do that. So the Water Board was asked by the state legislature to look at developing a low-income rate assistance program. When, as part of the governor's, the state has a human right to water. On top of that, governor, as he came in, really is focused on safe, clean and affordable drinking water. And so how we make water affordable for everyone has been a priority. As it relates to articulating that priority during COVID, the governor was one of the first in the nation to say that water could not be cut off for failure to pay. And so the state board, led by Eileen and Joaquin, did an analysis to look at what those needs, arrearages needs were. And last year's budget appropriated $1 billion to help with that arrearages program. In addition, in the federal infrastructure and jobs plan, there's discussion of how to help small communities and individuals and small systems that can't support themselves without rate assistance. So we, I think, are in the process of looking at, it's not an easy nut to crack. Obviously, the Public Utilities Commission have done this with the independent owned utilities for energy rates. And the board continues to hold hearings and discussions on the best way to make this happen. So super appreciate the question, something that we're very focused on. I think at the end of the day, the biggest truism that we've learned from COVID and different financial crises is that school systems really don't have the capacity to manage these programs. And the issues that we're looking at, and the water board is engaged in a very large number of mandatory consolidations for the purposes of providing good drinking water. That will also, I think, help us think through how to manage these kinds of rate assistance programs. So more to come in this space. Look forward to continuing this conversation, but it's definitely a big priority of this administration.
Hey, Aaron, this is Chuck. If I could just add one thing. We've had a lot of questions about climate resiliency and infrastructure. And I would just make the pitch to those on the phone. First, Happy New Year, and I hope everyone's safe. There's a lot to like in the governor's budget for our department outside drought. But recall last year, we received about $50 million of that $5.2 billion. And now the governor proposes an additional $75 million. You could view that $75 million as a climate resiliency infrastructure modernization upgrade for our department. We run the world's largest hatchery programs. We have lands all over the state, and we can quantify what we did in 2021 with that investment, and we can quantify what we're going to do in 2022, 2023, down to the project level, fixing our hatcheries, upgrading our raceways, improving our own water conveyances. It equals climate resiliency and water savings and puts fish and wildlife in a better spot to deal with the drought. So.
Thank you, Director Bonham. There's a question here about maintenance of the Oroville Dam and whether or not there is any funding in this budget for that.
So that's a good question. And that's funding that actually comes from the State Water Project, not from our general fund here in California, and not appropriated bond revenues. So all of Oroville Dam's maintenance is funded through the State Water Project and the state water contractors for whom they receive that water supply benefit. I have a lot of information on our program for maintenance for that facility, but also other additional investments in the safety of that facility, which I'd be delighted to have an in-depth conversation with this questioner offline, but it is not part of our state fund budget.
Great, thank you, Director Namath. And I think that will bring us to a close of the question and answer period. I don't know if anyone has any further final closing remarks they might want to provide before we close it out. I will, while you're thinking about it, just quickly say, and we'll put a slide up at the very end, there are other other budget briefings that are being held on other topics. So at the very end, we will put up a slide that provides information on the topics and how to register.
Yeah, I might make a really obvious sort of public service announcement, which is, we have over 300 people in this discussion, and you all are water leaders across the state. Thanks to the Water Board and Department of Water Resources, we're really driving this message home that despite a pretty remarkable December on rain and snow, we are very much in the throes of this drought, and we need to continue to operate as such. So really appreciate everyone's continued education on people that might not follow California water as much. We've got millions of dollars into the Save Our Water campaign, and we're working really hard to convey the message of just the need for water conservation and the need for local water resiliency. So really do appreciate everyone's continued focus on that.
I'll just add before letting Karen give the final words, that I think as a state team, we're realizing we have to manage from a place of scarcity. Often we in the past have managed from a place of hoping for the best and then having to dial it back. Secondly, really manages as an emergency. We have Office of Emergency Services in our drought meetings now to really understand how we can manage this. And thirdly, I think really this is merging with climate. It used to be seen as a separate issue, drought and climate, and now this extreme weather as a result of climate is front and center for us as Californians. And so I guess there is one final element, which is not on again, off again. Wade just described, the intensity of our efforts around Save Our Water, but just like energy efficiency or conservation in the energy space, they've continued year after year after year to reduce demand through efficiency programs and conservation. And I think you're going to see much more of that in this space in the year ahead. And with that, I'll turn it over to our esteemed colleague, the Secretary of the Department of the Agency of Food and Agriculture, the Right Honorable Karen Ross.
Hard to follow that, secretaries. But I do want to pick up on that particular thing because water is such a precious resource, not just here, but on a global basis. When we think about food security and climate resiliency, water will be a driving issue. And so every step, every measure that we take here, working together, it is about first and foremost making sure that every one of our citizens has access to safe, clean drinking water. It is about having healthy ecosystems, and that not have healthy farms without healthy ecosystems. It demands that we all work together. And so using every drop as carefully as possible, conserving every place that we possibly can, and thinking about this integrated resource management approach that requires all of us to continue spending a lot of time together, working together, and very collaborative systems approaches is going to be even more important than it already has been. And so I'm confident that we'll be able to do it together. I'm confident and applaud the great work that our farmers and ranchers are doing to lean into climate change and be part of the solution. And I want to thank all of our stakeholders who took the time to be a part of this conference today, this conference call today. Thank you.
Thanks all, and we will put up the slide now. It shows you the other briefings that we have scheduled this week. And if you are looking to register and are interested in attending, go to the California Natural Resources Agency homepage or the Cal EPA homepage, and there are links to register. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We look forward to our continued partnership.